Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and these are the 10 best cards from the Journey to Un'Goro expansion. Now that the expansion has had a little bit of time to settle into the meta, we've seen the decks that have come out of Journey to Un'Goro, and now we know the best, most meta-defining cards from the expansion. I think it's finally safe to declare which cards, to me, have had the biggest impact, have led to the most success, have redefined classes, decks, and archetypes, so therefore, to me, are the best cards from the set. And one last thing, there are actually a lot of strong cards in Journey to Un'Goro, and defining which 10 cards went on this list was a real challenge. There are going to be some good cards that are left out, and there are going to be people who make great cases for why those cards belonged on the list, and frankly, I can't argue with you. Depending upon your perspective, what kind of decks you like to play, what rank you're at in the meta, this list could be pretty significantly different. And there are probably 25, 30 fantastic cards in Un'Goro that are all worth crafting. I'm not saying that cards I left off this list are bad by any means. It's just that these are the 10 to me that have stood out the most and have had the biggest, most important impact on the game so far. So all of that said, let's go ahead and jump into this list. Starting off at the number 10 spot is a card that actually surprised me. I thought this one wouldn't be very strong, but it has made Token Druid one of the most prominent decks on the ladder, and Living Mana is the reason that's so successful now, because this is a great sort of backup option for Token Druids. If their board gets cleared, they can still play Living Mana, still develop a ton of minions, and then leverage those minions to either win the game with Savage Roar damage or just buff them up again and provide a force that an opponent simply can't deal with. It's really the perfect tool for Token Druids, which is a deck that's been around for a long time and has always had some success and would probably be successful even without Living Mana to some degree, but Living Mana has just pushed it over the edge and made it even better, making this a fairly frustrating card to play against from time to time, but one that has still opened up a new deck in the meta, which is a really cool thing to see and has earned this card's spot on the list. Up next at the number 9 spot is the Rogue Quest, The Caverns Below. Some people might have expected to see this card higher on the list, just given how dominant this was early in Un'Goro, but this card has really started to settle down a little bit. Quest Rogue feels a lot more balanced and certainly doesn't seem like it's a meta-defining deck, although it can be very frustrating to lose against, and people still do play it with quite a bit of regularity. It's not the best deck from Un'Goro, but all that said, Caverns Below is still obviously very strong. It's given Rogue a viable way to play. It's very different than anything we've ever seen before, and clearly that archetype, that style of Rogue couldn't exist without this card. So its impact on the meta has been incredibly significant. Even if that is dwindling a little bit, it seems like Caverns Below is going to be a viable choice for Rogue, at least through this expansion and perhaps even through future ones as additional cards are added, making this a good fit for the list, of course, but not quite as high as some people might have expected. Moving on to the number 8 spot is another card I'm surprised to see here. Even though it's a meager 1 mana, 1/2 minion, Firefly seems to just keep showing up, and not only in elemental decks as an elemental trigger, but frankly it shows up in aggro decks, just as multiple smaller minions you can play simultaneously. So in a lot of ways, this just is a good card in general. It's not just a tribal synergy card. It's finding its way into so many different decks that you'd never expect to see it in, whether to counter aggression, to provide some bodies, like in Token Druid, for instance, to buff up and just get a lot of stats onto the board quickly. It's great in Quest Rogue, as we just saw too, is just giving you elementals that can help activate the quest. I'm stunned how many different kinds of decks have found a way to use this card. If anything, this card might actually just deserve to be even higher on the list because of how prominent it's been, but I do think there are some more significant or impactful cards ahead of it, and that's why it only made it to the number 8 spot. But still, clearly, even though it doesn't look like much, at the end of the day, still one of the most consistent and most playable cards from the expansion. On the other side of that equation is my number 7 card, which isn't necessarily meta-defining in a top-tier deck. It looks like most of the Priest decks are more like Tier 2 or Tier 3 decks, but Lyra the Sun Shard is just so strong as a card itself that it still earns a spot on this list, because it is one of the best cards in the expansion. The amount of raw value this thing can produce is absolutely absurd. We've all seen those nutty Lyra turns where an opponent just goes off and defeats us, or of course you can do it yourself too if you've been playing Priest in this expansion. And I think it's one of the most fun, most exciting cards in the entire set, and it looks like it's going to make Priest a force to be reckoned with, and already brought Priest back to life a little bit when it looked like it might die with a lack of dragons as we moved into the standard format rotation with Journey to Ungoro. But Lyra gave Priest essentially a second chance at life and made it playable in some new and exciting and fun ways. Lyra has definitely been one of the most talked about, most enjoyed cards in the expansion so far. Moving on to the number 6 spot, it's the Warrior Quest Fire Plume's Heart. This one was pretty quickly identified as a very powerful card in a control style warrior deck, but not a traditional control warrior as we'd understood it in the past, but of course one that really focused on taunt bodies on the board. And frankly, Taunt Warrior was figured out really quickly, and it was shot to the top of the competitive ranks as far as top tier decks were concerned early in Ungoro. And although it's lost a little bit of that power along the way as stronger decks have been discovered, Taunt Warrior is still very good, still played quite regularly, and Fire Plume's Heart is the reason that that deck is finally possible. It really says a lot when Blizzard has been trying for multiple expansions to make that work, and it took this card being so darn powerful and the result of the quest activation being so oppressively good and a bit frustrating, admittedly, that finally this is what did the trick and made it work. I think that's a sign and a symbol for just how good Fire Plume's Heart truly is. And now we've made it to the top 5, starting off with Tar Creeper. Much like Firefly before it on the list, this is another neutral minion that it's actually stunning just how many decks have picked up this card. It's not just about elemental synergies, it's just a really good 3-mana minion that's very frustrating for opponents to deal with, particularly if they're in more aggressive decks. It can be a lot of stats to move through that early in the game, particularly if you do something like coin it out on turn 2, giving control decks a great early to mid-game answer to aggro. It also gives elemental decks another body to work with. It gives Taunt Warriors a card that they're happy to play. There's a lot of things about Tar Creeper that works really well, and although a card like Stonehill Defender probably deserves a spot on this list too, just because it's another card that's been played a lot in a lot of different decks successfully, I went ahead and gave the edge to Tar Creeper here in the 3-mana taunt spot, just simply because this one can be run more successfully by a wider variety of decks, and I think so far we've seen exactly that. Stonehill Defender really traditionally is just showing up so far in Paladin and in Warrior, whereas Tar Creeper is showing up for a lot of people in a lot of different settings. And since it has different ways to work with elementals and anti-aggro, and it's not just about pure value like Stonehill Defender tends to be, that's what makes Tar Creeper so good and earns him the number 5 spot on this list. Moving on to the number 4 spot is a card that really brought Hunter back to life all by itself. So many people thought the Hunter Quest is what would bring the class back to life, but really it was Crackling Razor Maw that resurrected Hunter, simply because this is one of the best 2-drops in the game. Not only does it have great stats for Hunter, not only is it a beast, but this battle cry can be totally absurd, giving you huge advantages in the early game that just help you steamroll to victory on the back of a really frustratingly difficult board for your opponents to remove. So Crackling Razor Maw develops the threat of its own in the early game as a 3-2, because 3 damage for Hunter is awfully good, makes other things a lot better, can do sick combo plays in the late game, so it's not only an early game minion, but it's something you don't even hate to see as a top deck necessarily, because if you can give that Savannah Highmane Wind Fury, guess what? You're probably going to win the game. And this minion alone has been strong enough to propel mid-range Hunter near the top tier of decks. And frankly, the potential seems unlimited for this card in the future too. It's just that darn good. It brought an entire class back to life. Crackling Razor Maw is one of the best cards in the set. And now we're into the top 3, starting off with Primordial Glyph, a spell which is really just kind of insane. A fact that a lot of people have picked up on, being able to cycle this card into a new card that you get to pick. By the way, the fact that this is a discover effect is totally crazy good, because it gives you flexibility, it gives you decision making, it gives you control in the moment, so you can adapt your choice to whatever you might need in a specific scenario, which cannot be underrated because that is a very powerful thing, as we've seen with so many other Discover cards in the past. Not only does it do all that, but it actually also reduces the cost of the spell you discover, so you basically get to cycle Primordial Glyph for free. I think this card would still be decent if it didn't give a cost reduction. It'd still be overpowered if it gave a cost reduction by 1, but as it stands right now, it's just completely absurd just how good this is. So not only does it work with things like Quest Mage, where you get activations from spells that didn't start in your hand. That's not, of course, the most prominent use case for this card, but it works in every kind of mage, because it can give you the perfect meteor in a slower control style mage. It can give you an ice block to stay alive if you need to find burn. It can give you the burn you need to find if you need a fireball to face. Primordial Glyph is just the ultimate flexibility card. It's the perfect answer in so many different kinds of situations, and it doesn't penalize you at all for giving you those options and giving you that flexibility, giving you that choice, making it just stupidly good. And then moving on to my number 2 spot, it's another Primordial card. And the only reason this one really takes the spot over Primordial Glyph is simply because this is a neutral card that we've seen run in a variety of different classes, unlike Primordial Glyph, of course, which is limited specifically to Mage. But Primordial Drake is also a fantastic card, and arguably I would say one of the best neutral minions that we've ever seen from an expansion that is not a legendary. This thing is just ridiculously strong. Not only does it develop a really nice 4/8 taunt body when you play it, but of course it's got that battle cry that it destroys boards, making it great in any kind of control deck that needs a catch-up mechanism. It's been most prominent perhaps in Taunt Warrior as a really successful way to combo out things like Sleep with the Fishes or just destroy an aggressive board of really cheap minions. But frankly, a lot of different decks are picking up on this card with things like Curator, where you get to summon draw a dragon from your deck, making Primordial Drake a cool little one-of just for Curator synergies. But you can't go wrong running this minion. It's just the perfect turn 8 play, not to mention the impact it has in Arena, which is maybe even more absurd than in standard format. But this card is just a great addition to any deck that plans to play until turn 8. This is the kind of card that fits. So it's good in Dragon Priest. It's good in Taunt Warrior. It's been played in mid-range and control-style Paladin decks, and the sky is the limit as far as making this card work. So not only is it good and impactful now, but it's going to be good as long as it's in standard format too. So Primordial Drake, fantastic card. Maybe not quite as outright powerful as a few of the previous class cards on this list, but again, I'm giving it the nudge, giving it the edge here simply because it is a neutral card, and that's a kind of thing that can make it more impactful across a wider variety of decks and classes, and therefore more important and just better as far as Journey of Guro's meta is concerned. But there's still one card I think is stronger, and that is the Sunkeeper. This guy has made Paladin a force to be reckoned with on the ladder, in combination in particular with stuff like Murlocs and more aggressive Murloc Paladins. This is the kind of thing that is just the perfect mid-range minion to finish off that curve, buff your Murlocs to its absurd stats, and the way it synergizes with Murloc War Leader too for that aura buff makes it even stronger. But it's not just good in aggressive Murloc decks as a finisher, it's also great in control decks as a big debuff to your opponent's board that forces action through it since it's a taunt. This is like the ultimate flexible minion. Paladin basically has 2 or 3 different decks that are all very top tier as we've settled into the Journey to Unguro meta. And frankly, Sunkeeper Tareem is the reason those decks are there. This card is what puts them over the edge. They'd be much worse without this guy just because he's so strong in so many different kinds of settings. His effect just works. It does things you want it to do. There are so many different scenarios and environments where playing Sunkeeper Tareem ends up being like the perfect answer and gives you the out that you need, whether that's buffing your own minions, setting up trades into really strong minions of your opponents. It can do it all, and it's just a really well-designed card that propelled a pretty much forgotten class in the past to the very top of Journey to Unguro. And because this card has enabled such a dramatic swing in Paladin's importance in the meta, I think you have to give it the top spot. Give it the honor of the best card in Journey to Unguro. And there you have it. That's my list. As I mentioned, a really difficult top 10 list to define. So many fantastic cards. Sometimes it felt a little arbitrary moving stuff in different spots, but that is my take on it. That's how I see Journey to Ungrow shaping up. Now, I'm sure people out there are going to have some suggestions of their own, and I'm sure there are going to be some good ones too. So share your take on the 10 best Journey to Ungrow cards in the comments below. I want to see what you guys have to think. Did I get the order all wrong? Did I get some right? What cards did I forget? What cards would you put on the list in specific places? What's your top card in particular? That's the thing I'm most curious about. So I'm happy to see all of those comments. But until then, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.